Suddenly, the distant sound of sirens grows louder. Jamal's heart leaps. The officer stiffens, his posture changing as he glances toward the sound. Captain Williams' car screeches to a halt just yards away, and he steps out with an authority that demands attention. The officer turns to see him approaching, his face shifting from irritation to unease. The crowd watches in silence, their phones capturing every second. The air is electric with tension as Captain Williams locks eyes with the officer, his expression a mix of fury and composure. "This stops now," Williams says, his voice calm but commanding. The officer looks between Jamal and the imposing figure walking toward him, realization slowly dawning. But the question remains, will he back down, or will this confrontation push everything over the edge? The moment of truth is here, and no one knows how it will end. Stay tuned. This is where everything changes. The officer's hand instinctively moves to his belt as Captain Williams approaches, but he hesitates, his unease growing. "What's going on here?" Williams asks, his voice calm yet filled with an unmistakable edge of authority. Jamal exhales a shaky breath, relief flooding him at the sight of his father. The officer straightens up, attempting to regain control of the situation. "This is a routine stop," he says curtly, his tone defensive. "Your son was acting suspiciously." Williams tilts his head, his expression unreadable. "Suspiciously? For what exactly?" The officer falters for a moment, clearly caught off guard by the question. Before he can respond, Williams gestures toward the crowd. "Do you see all those people recording this? Do you understand how quickly this situation has escalated because of your actions?" But just as it seems the officer might back down, a second squad car pulls up. Another officer steps out, this one younger, more composed, and clearly surprised to see Captain Williams. "Captain," the newcomer says, glancing between Williams, Jamal, and the other officer. "What's going on here?" Before Williams can respond, the first officer cuts in, trying to save face. "I've got this under control. No need for backup." But the younger officer doesn't look convinced. He walks over to Jamal, lowering his voice. "Are you okay?" Jamal nods hesitantly, but his eyes betray his lingering fear. The tension thickens as Williams turns to the first officer. "You said this was routine," he says, his voice steady. "So why is my son out of the car? Why are you searching his vehicle without cause?" The crowd murmurs, sensing the shift in power. The first officer opens his mouth to respond, but before he can, the younger officer speaks up. "I think there's been a mistake here," he says carefully, his eyes narrowing at his colleague. And then, out of nowhere, a voice from the crowd calls out, "I saw the whole thing. He didn't do anything wrong." Everyone turns toward the speaker, a middle-aged woman holding her phone high. She steps forward, her voice growing louder. That officer was out of line from the start. He never even told the young man why he pulled him over. The first officer's face turns red as he realizes the situation is spiraling out of his control. Williams watches him closely, his expression hardening. But just as it seems the officer might admit fault, he does something no one expects. He turns to Jamal and says, "You think you're untouchable because of who your father is. Let's see how far that gets you." The crowd gasps, the cameras catching every word. Captain Williams takes a step closer, his voice low and deliberate. "I suggest you think very carefully about what you say next." The first officer stares at him, defiant but visibly rattled. And then the radio crackles. A voice on the other end urgently calls for assistance at a nearby location. The younger officer glances at his partner, then back at Williams, as if silently pleading for direction. The moment hangs in the air, charged with tension. What happens next will change everything, and the stakes have never been higher. Stay tuned. This story is far from over. The street feels frozen in time, the weight of the officer's last words hanging heavy in the air. Captain Williams takes a deep breath, his eyes locked on the officer. The younger cop looks increasingly uneasy, clearly torn between loyalty to his partner and doing what's right. The crowd, now larger, is completely silent, waiting to see how this will unfold. "Enough," Williams says, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You've overstepped your authority, and it's all on camera. You think this is about pulling rank. This is about doing what's right, and right now, you're not." The officer stiffens, his jaw tightening, but before he can respond, the younger cop steps forward. "Captain Williams is right," he says firmly. "This isn't procedure, and it's not acceptable. I've seen enough." He looks at his partner, his voice steady but filled with conviction. It's a quiet afternoon on a suburban street when the flashing red and blue lights of a police car suddenly pierce the calm. Behind the wheel of his sleek black sedan, Jamal, a young man in his early 20s, glances nervously in his rearview mirror. He pulls over, his heart pounding. Jamal knows he hasn't done anything wrong, but for him, being stopped by the police has always been more than just a routine encounter. Today, it's about to take a turn no one saw coming. The officer approaches, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. His demeanor is cold, his voice sharp. "License and registration," he demands, his tone dripping with authority. Jamal tries to remain calm as he hands over his documents, but the officer's piercing gaze and condescending remarks only make him more uneasy. The situation escalates quickly as the officer begins making unfounded accusations, ignoring Jamal's attempts to explain. What the officer doesn't know is that Jamal isn't just any young man. He's the son of a highly respected police captain, and right now, Captain Williams is just a phone call away. As the officer's behavior grows increasingly inappropriate, Jamal makes a decision that will change everything. With trembling hands, he picks up his phone and dials. What happens next will leave you speechless. How will Captain Williams respond to his son's call for help? And what will happen when the officer realizes who Jamal's father is? Stay tuned, because this story is about to take an unexpected turn you won't want to miss. Jamal's hands tremble as he presses the call button, his father's name glowing on the screen. He can hear the officer's impatient tapping on the roof of his car, but Jamal refuses to back down. As the phone rings, a mixture of fear and determination floods his chest. Captain Williams answers on the third ring, his deep, commanding voice immediately grounding Jamal. "Dad," Jamal says, trying to steady his voice, "I've been pulled over, and it's not good. The officer is acting." He pauses, glancing at the officer, who's now leaning down, glaring through the open window. "It's bad, Dad. I need you." On the other end, Captain Williams goes silent for a moment before speaking firmly. "Stay calm. Tell me where you are. I'm on my way." As Jamal gives the location, the officer narrows his eyes, his patience clearly wearing thin. "What's this, huh?" Calling backup. "Who do you think you are?" he says, his voice laced with mockery. Jamal doesn't respond, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The tension is palpable, the air heavy with unspoken words. Meanwhile, back at the station, Captain Williams is moving quickly, his presence commanding attention. He calls in a trusted colleague to join him, explaining the situation with clipped urgency. He's not just a father in this moment. He's a man who knows the system, knows the stakes, and knows exactly how these encounters can go wrong. As he speeds toward his son, Jamal remains trapped in the growing standoff. The officer begins to escalate, questioning Jamal about things unrelated to the traffic stop, his tone increasingly aggressive. Jamal tries to stay calm, but his patience is wearing thin. Unbeknownst to them both, other people in the area have started recording the interaction from a distance, their quiet murmurs, filled with curiosity and concern. The stage is set for a confrontation that no one could have predicted, and every second feels like an eternity. What will happen when Captain Williams arrives? And will the officer realize the mistake he's made before it's too late? Stay with us. This story is far from over. The officer's impatience boils over as he steps closer to Jamal's car, his hand hovering near his holster. "Step out of the vehicle," he barks, his tone sharp enough to make Jamal flinch. Jamal hesitates for a moment, his mind racing. He knows his rights, but the officer's escalating aggression leaves him uncertain about what might happen next. Slowly, he unbuckles his seatbelt and steps out, his hands raised slightly to show he means no harm. The officer begins questioning him aggressively, his voice echoing in the quiet neighborhood. Jamal answers calmly, doing his best to keep the situation from spiraling further. But the tension is undeniable, drawing more attention from passers-by. A small crowd has formed at a safe distance, their phones raised, documenting every second. Meanwhile, Captain Williams is just minutes away, his thoughts racing as he tries to piece together what's happening. He's not just angry, he's worried. He knows the complexities of situations like these, how they can escalate in an instant. His colleague in the passenger seat tries to reassure him, but Williams' grip tightens on the steering wheel as he pushes the car faster. For him, this isn't just about Jamal, it's about the larger issue he's seen play out far too many times during his career.